Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be finishing up our little mini-series on whether or not an eternal life is desirable with the question, would eternity get boring? So, in the last two videos we covered first Bernard Williams' argument that eternal life is not actually desirable, and then the negative impacts of that argument on certain religious traditions. Check out those specific videos for more on Williams's argument that eternity will eventually become oppressively boring, and why this is a problem for specific religions. In this video, we're going to focus on objections to that argument. So if you are not aware of Williams's argument or you haven't watched those videos, it would be a good idea to do that now. Now, as a skeptic, I am sympathetic to arguments which expose issues with religious dogma. However, I am doubtful that Williams has done enough to prove the full force of his claim. There's some kinds of goals, such as perpetual goals and infinitely creative goals, which will never be accomplished, but will never lead to boredom. While these concerns will weaken Williams' argument, the argument still retains some of its power against the theist, as we will see. So first, we're going to look at a couple of objections, particularly around perpetual goals and creative goals. And then we will look at how, while it does weaken the argument against theism, it doesn't completely get rid of it. So, one type of goal which can never be fully accomplished, but is infinitely fulfilling, is a perpetual goal. Say you want to be a good parent to as many children as possible. Each child will be different, bring different challenges, and will be raised in a different time and environment. And each of those children will necessarily be different and can't be judged on the same scale of how good of a parent you were. And so you won't get to a point where you were the best parent you could possibly be and therefore are bored every time afterward. Even if you were to get the exact same child at some point in the future, because you've run out of genetic combinations, remember, eternity is oppressive and can get every single one of every possible DNA. History is accumulative, not cyclical, and you'll never raise the same child in the same world twice. This goal is constantly fulfilling and yet never fulfilled. Therefore, probably wouldn't get boring. Similarly, you might have the goal of being a good friend and keeping in touch with people you're close to. This goal is one that always needs to be done and achieved, but can be eternally new as your friends change and as you gain new friends. Similar to the children, because the environment you meet them in will never be the same, even under the pressures of infinity, that you might meet someone identical to another friend, the interaction will still be new because the world will have changed. And because we're always adding more people to the world, there's infinitely many ways the world can be different. And the only way to beat one infinity is with another. Another way of framing this concern is by saying that you have conditional goals like eating, having shelter, etc. And you have unconditional goals like writing a novel. But conditional goals are not the only perpetual goals. They're not the only goals that you have to do every day. You can also have unconditional perpetual goals, goals that make life worth living, but have to be done every single day in order to be achieved. If perpetual goals like that exist, at least some of the force of Williams's argument that an afterlife would be necessarily boring, or an infinite life would be necessarily boring, fall away. Additionally, there are a range of creative goals that would never be completed. Say you want to be a fantasy novelist. You want to write fantasy series. There will always be a new story to tell or invent. Even under the pressures of infinity, you can always write longer and longer stories. And if you read books in the fantasy genre, you will be aware that some of them are very, very long. And you can imagine with an infinite amount of time, you could write even longer and more complex epics. There's no limit to the amount of book you could write. And so there's no limit to this goal. You can always keep writing more and more creative books. While we might eventually write all of the possible haikus in the world by putting all of the possible words into them in all the possible arrangements to fit the form of a haiku in terms of syllables, we'd never write all of the possible fantasy books because they can be as long as you want, As time goes on, the stories will necessarily grow in length to avoid repetition, but they never need repeat. With this in mind, it's easy to see how you could never get bored, even if your goal was only to read every fantasy book ever written, because more books will be written faster than you can read them. More movies will be made faster than you can watch them. More people will be born faster than you can write biographies of them. So you don't even need to have the goal of being a fantasy writer to have a creative goal that is infinitely fulfillable and infinitely fulfilling. You could simply be someone that wants to read all of the fantasy books out there, or watch all of the heist movies that exist. As long as we have enough people, and if everyone's living infinitely, we likely will, to keep making enough creative content such that you would never run out of it, such that they're making it at a faster rate than you can consume it, you'll never get bored because you'll always have a new story to read and always have a new movie to watch. This means that these goals will never be achieved, but they will similarly be forever new and different as new styles evolve and longer works are written. Now, while this might be a convincing argument, both the perpetual argument and the creative argument, it doesn't completely destroy the impact of Williams's argument. He could still make the case that for people who have non-perpetual, non-creative goals, eternal life is a punishment, as these people would be forced to change the goals central to their identities and adopt creative pursuits, or simply become impossibly bored. If none of these infinitely achievable goals are something that you have as your goal, then you will be bored or need to change your identity completely. And Williams's argument still applies. So while we lose the kind of universal scope of this is bad for everyone, it still has the impact of, for some people, eternal life would suck. So what then would be the impact of this weaker argument on the case against religion? So it provides more easy answers for the theist. If they wanted to claim that people freely choose their goals, and those who choose non-creative goals deserve to be punished in heaven with intractable boredom no matter how good they are, they could. However, this seems like a big bullet to bite, both in the sense of it requires kind of a, goal voluntarism of being able to choose your goals. Some people might think that your goals are actually things that are determined by your context, your situation, your biology, what have you. But also, it means that people who don't have creative goals are morally bad people and should be punished in an afterlife. While there might be a religion that espouses such a view, few religions, in my experience, seem to say that you know what you need to do? You must be an artist. You must be someone that cares about making movies or doing these things or has some kind of creative goal. So, few religions make the argument that you must pursue or have as a central part of your identity artistic, creative, or perpetual goals. That said, this does open the aperture slightly wider for such responses to the argument. The religious person, on the other hand, could make the argument alongside this that also changing your goals is completely acceptable, and that it doesn't change your identity to change to a creative pursuit, and that people can do that. It will run into the challenges of Williams's initial argument, but they might make that argument. However, as long as there are good people with non-perpetual, non-creative goals who don't want to change those goals, Williams's argument will still pose a problem for the 3-0 theist, because even if you make the case that changing your identity isn't a bad thing, isn't necessarily a bad thing, and the case that you can have perpetual and creative goals, there can still be people in this world of free will that may not want to change their goals or may not want to do those things. The theist is committed to the claim that those people are immoral and deserve punishment because they will suffer an eternity of punishment because they can never get new unconditional goals once the finite unconditional goals that they have are unfulfilled. So, while it certainly weakens Williams's argument, and these objections can shave things off the side, this is still an issue for a specific conception of religion and eternal life. What do you think? Is eternal life desirable? Could we live happily forever, creating and consuming stories and art? Or is there a problem with these objections? Do you think that these objections aren't sufficient to address Williams's initial concerns? Give me your thoughts in the comments below. If you like this video, go ahead and subscribe, hit the notification bell so you can see more videos like it whenever we put them out, and watch this video and more here at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.